All right, guys, welcome back. Survival Living here. So yesterday I put out a video talking about the nuclear facility there in Ukraine, the threat of a meltdown. And I'm looking at this thing as logically as possible because the facility itself was not damaged, just the dam below it as far as the water levels there that feed into the cooling ponds to keep the reactors cool, especially after their cold shutdown. You got to keep the reactor core, the spent fuel rods, all these things, you got to keep water going to it. And I got a lot of lashback from viewers and actually other YouTubers. Let's go ahead and explain some things here. One, the facility has been shut down. They were able to cold shut everything. The reactors are safe. There's no damage to the nuclear facility. All right. The main problem, the fear that is going on right now, is that the water delivery since the dam was blown up, there's not enough water being able to cool off the facility and the cooling ponds. All right. Now, what I wanted to do is bring you some factual information. According to Paris-based Institute of Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety, IRSN, the loss of the pool would not necessarily be catastrophic, as other sources of waters could be brought in, such as pumping trucks. This is something that I tried to explain. The infrastructure is still set up. The facility is not blown up. They can still bring water in, just like they've been doing for Fukushima, the nuclear facility in Japan, that they are constantly bringing water in. All right. It doesn't mean we're fixing to have now. If there's no way of bringing water to this thing, yes, we have something to worry about. But as right now, they can bring water in. But we'll go further into this. Now, officials in Ukraine is talking about the collapse of the dike around the cooling ponds. Now, that is a threat for multiple reasons. One, they're saying if the water levels get too low, it'll collapse, and then they have no way of cooling it using the cooling ponds. That is a threat. I'm relying a lot of this on the cooling ponds. As long as they can get water into that cooling pond, they're fine. The big threat is what I'm seeing about the narrative. They warn of dangers of sabotage by Russian forces who occupy the plant. They're worried about Russia blowing up or destroying these dikes so that it will melt down. Now, whether you believe Ukraine did it or Russia did it, that's entirely up to you. I don't believe anything that I'm seeing coming as far as news and information from this war. It's constantly being misled the entire time. So let's go ahead and discuss some of the timeline and everything, and actually the facility, what's going on. Since the collapse of the Kovaka Dam on Tuesday, the reservoir has been draining into the river and the Black Sea beyond, and will soon drop below the water intake use of pumps to bring in water and spray the ponds that is used to cool the reactor cores and spent fuel rods at site, and the much bigger cooling pool used as a water reserve. All right, now that's talking about the water level. Since the dam blown, the water levels above it are dropping, and that's where the nuclear facility is. Their issue that they have is that their piping only goes so far in, and now it's gotten to what they call the dead zone, where that piping can no longer pull that water out of the major reservoir. And they actually quote that they are reaching the dead zone, which is 12.7 meters. After that, they won't be able to pull any water out of the reservoir to cool off the power station or the cooling ponds. Okay. Now, with that being said, like I said, they have the availability to bring in water, but let's talk about these cooling ponds. He later added that the water from the reservoir is still being pumped to the power plant and cool reactors in other areas. So they're still pumping, even though everyone else is saying it's not. This person right here on the report is saying that it's still being pumped. Still being pumped to the power plant to cool reactors and other areas, though levels at the value earlier thought to make it impossible. So what they believe was the lowest level possible to bring in water, they've actually exceeded that. Now, the water is getting low, don't get me wrong. That's eventually going to extinguish itself. All right. The plant can also rely on large cooling ponds above the reservoir with several months worth of water. The cooling ponds has several months worth of water. These cooling ponds, I think people are getting confused. These are not reactor spent fuel rod cooling ponds. They're little reserve ponds is what it is. They've got several of them for a few months worth of water to keep those other cooling ponds with the spent reactors to keep it cool. All right, people to see a headline or part of a story and run with it. They do have things in place. All right, they have a couple months worth there. Within a couple months, if they cannot figure out how to get water to this thing, and again I bring up Fukushima, they were just trucking it in. Now if they can't do that, then yes, there will be a meltdown. But until then, as long as this plan goes in place, they'll be fine until they can fix the dam. The facility is fine. Fukushima is 1,000 times worse because that facility was tore all to pieces after the earthquake and the tsunami. All right. So again, back to the dike being destroyed for the cooling ponds and things like that. The water reserves, not the fuel rod cooling ponds. That's inside the facility. All right, they don't have the spent fuel rods just willy-nilly outside somewhere because anybody can get hold of that or damage those. These are inside the facility. If you ever looked inside of a nuclear facility, all that stuff's inside. You see the huge cooling ponds that they actually say you can actually swim in because the water works as a natural barrier against radiation. I don't recommend doing it, but that's what they say can happen. That's inside the facility. This is something, it's a water delivery system. All right. There's no spent fuel rods in those cooling ponds. All right, that's water reserves. I'm talking about the ones that are off-site, that are above the reservoir. If the dike is destroyed as a result of water pressure, there are many means to replenish the spray ponds, like pump trucks, bringing water from the river to the water basin locally nearby. They're ready to go. Is this a big threat? Yes, it's still a threat if something major happens to the facility. If something happens to the ability to bring water in. But they're not trucking water from 1,000 miles away. The river's still right there. It's just not as full. They can still pump that out and bring it over. It's right there. So, unless something happens to the facility itself, as far as a meltdown, but they were successfully able to cold shut down everything. It's in cold status right now. Their issue is bringing water, but they're not having an issue bringing water. They have reserved, they call cooling ponds. This is not the cooling ponds for spent fuel rods. I have to keep on stressing that out because I have just been chastised by other YouTube creators that are bigger than me that obviously don't know what the hell they're talking about because they only grab part of it, a little bit of information, and then want to talk crap to me. Do some damn research before coming up here. Excuse me. My whole channel is about teaching preparedness, getting people prepared for shit hits the fan. I cover some topics that people call fear porn. It's actual topics that we're seeing and we try to discuss. That's what I'm doing with this right here. But instead of just running that we're all going to die, make sure you get your freaking gas masks, which, hey, I sell myself. But the fact is, this does not look like it's going to have a meltdown because they have the availability to bring water in. There's no damage to the facility. It's right there on the basin of the river. All they have to do is park a freaking pump truck right there. Run those lines in that river. This is very rudimentary. I'm sure they have more sophisticated systems. And then pump it right in. That's it. The big threat is if sabotage happens. And that's my concern. If a little bit of radiation was to leak out, it goes into the UN territories. They say they can go Article 5. This is another reason why I'm just not so sure that Russia was behind it. I'm not sure if Ukraine was behind it. I'm not sure of anything. Because they constantly lie to us. They want war, and they're going to keep pushing for it. This right here, a nuclear meltdown, would give them availability to war. But what I'm saying is the threat of a nuclear meltdown is not there. I am not seeing it because they have the availability to cool the facility. It might be secondary systems, but it's still able to cool. You know, Fukushima still is having water brought in. It's been years. Now, thing with Fukushima, they did have a meltdown. That was because of that tidal wave that came in, that tsunami. Destroyed the facility. They couldn't get in there. This is a different story. This is why I keep on stressing this out. Now, to talk about what I had spoke about, the floodwaters from the dam, I had said that it had flooded out crops. Well, I was mistaken on that. It was not flooding out crops. The water levels are now so low that the water canals and delivery systems for crops is not there. That's the issue. So I do have to correct that, because the reports I originally read and also had posted said floodwaters damaging crops. The more I dug into it, the more I see that the crops were not right there, but the canal systems to provide water for the crops is dried up because the water level is gone. All right, guys. So yes, I got heated. Sometimes I get so frustrated on being here on YouTube. I really do. I just try to teach people, get people prepared, and all I get is just crap. Speak to y'all later.